I want to tell you what I do for a living, because it matters to the story I'm about to tell. I keep records. That is the simplest way to put it. For 34 years, I taught history at Jefferson Davis High School in Natchez, Mississippi, which is a school named after a man whose legacy is complicated, but whose place in the historical record is not. I taught students how to read primary documents, how to ask where a source came from, who wrote it, and why they wrote it at the particular moment they chose to write it. I taught them that the official story and the true story are often two different things, and that the only way to tell them apart is to go back to the original documents and look. After I retired, I started a small business called Family Record. I help families write their own histories. I interview grandparents, gather photographs, collect letters and deeds and marriage certificates, and assemble them into a book, a real book, bound and printed, one copy for each branch of the family, so that the story of where they came from does not get lost in the gap between the generation that lived it and the generation that inherits it. I charge $4,000 for the service. I have done it 27 times in 8 years. I have never had a client regret it. I tell you all of this because last April, while I was working on a family record for the Tillman family in Woodville and finding, in the process, a set of letters from 1,943 that completely contradicted what the family had believed for 80 years about their grandfather's military service, I came home to find, on my kitchen table, a birthday card addressed to my granddaughter Lily. Lily was turning 7. The card was from my son Jerome and his wife Cassandra. It was a store-bought card with a cartoon bunny on the front. Inside, in Cassandra's handwriting, it said, "Happy birthday to the most special girl in the world from Mama, Daddy, and Grandma Cass." That is not a remarkable sentence. Grandmothers give themselves nicknames all the time. Cass is short for Cassandra. This is entirely normal. What was not normal, what I noticed, standing at my kitchen counter with my reading glasses still on from the Tillman letters, was the second line, which said, "We are so glad you have a grandmother who loves you the right way." I read that sentence 3 times. I set the card down on the counter. I picked it back up. I read it again. I have spent 40 years teaching students to identify what a document is doing, not just what it says, what it is doing. That sentence, in a birthday card to a 7-year-old girl, was doing something. I was not certain yet what. But I had the same feeling I get when a historical document says something that, on the surface, seems innocuous, and the hairs on the back of my neck say, "Go look at the record. Something here does not add up." I sat down at my kitchen table. I poured myself a glass of sweet tea, and I began, that evening, to go back through the record. Natchez is the kind of place that requires explanation to people who have not been here. It is the oldest city on the Mississippi River. It was settled in 1716. By the time of the Civil War, it was reportedly home to more millionaires per capita than any other city in the United States, all of it built on cotton, and on the people who were forced to pick it. Natchez has been sitting with that history for 160 years, and is still, in various ways, in the process of deciding what to do with it. The plantations are still here. The antebellum houses are still here. The genealogical societies are still here, doing their work, which is the honorable work of keeping track of who came from whom, and the sometimes uncomfortable work of figuring out which stories have been left out. I have lived in Natchez my entire life. I was born here in 1955, the daughter of a postal worker named Ernest Ashworth and a seamstress named Gloria, who could alter a dress to fit any body, and who believed, with a conviction I have inherited, that a thing made correctly lasts. I met Thomas Hale in 1979, at a church social at First Baptist on State Street. He was 26 years old. He had recently come back from 3 years working construction in New Orleans. He had calluses on his hands and no patience for small talk, and he told me on the night we met that he had gone to New Orleans to learn how to build things the right way, and had come back to Natchez because he wanted to build them here. I married him 14 months later. We had Jerome in 1983. Thomas died in 2018 of pancreatic cancer. We had 42 years. I have not found a way to describe what 42 years feels like from the outside, when it ends. I know what it feels like from the inside. It feels like a language you learned so thoroughly you forgot you were speaking it, and then one morning you try to say something simple and the words are not there. I say all of this because Thomas is part of this story, not because he did anything, because of the hairs on the back of my neck. Because part of what I noticed, when I sat down to go back through the record, is that the record I was looking at was not the record Thomas and I had kept. It was a different record. Someone had been slowly, carefully, over the course of 3 years, substituting one record for another. That is the kind of thing that, if you are not paying attention, you do not notice until it is complete. I am a woman who pays attention. Let me give you the record as I found it, and then let me give you the record as it should be. I will try to be accurate about both. Cassandra Price came into Jerome's life in the spring of 2019. They met at a work event in Nashville. She was working in hospital administration. He was doing IT consulting for a health system. She was from Findlay, Ohio. She had no family in Mississippi. She was, by every standard of observable behavior, a warm and attentive woman. Good manners, interested in other people, consistently kind to Jerome in ways that I noticed and appreciated. She came to Natchez for the first time in July of 2019. She stayed in the guest room. She helped me make biscuits Saturday morning without being asked. She asked Thomas, this was 4 months before he died, when he was still well enough to sit at the kitchen table for long stretches. She asked Thomas to tell her about the house. And he did. He told her everything. The loft he had built over the garage. The particular way the back porch had to be leveled every 3 years because of the clay soil underneath it. The map room. Thomas loved the map room. He had spent 2 years building it, bit by bit, adding maps to the wall the way other men add trophies. Some were antique originals he had bought at estate sales, framed carefully. Some were reproductions. And in the center of the east wall, there was one map he had drawn himself, a hand-lettered chart of every place the Hale family had lived since 1887, when Jerome's great-great-grandfather Ezekiel Hale built the first Hale house in Adams County. Thomas had updated it every year. The last entry, in his handwriting, was from October 2017. Jerome, Nashville, TN. Cassandra spent a long time looking at that map. I remember watching her from the doorway. She had her hands behind her back, the way visitors do in museums. She asked Thomas what it was for. Thomas said, "So nobody forgets where they came from." Jerome and Cassandra married in March of 2021 at a small ceremony in Nashville. Thomas was gone by then. I attended. Cassandra's parents flew in from Findlay. The ceremony was simple and sincere, and I have no criticism of any part of it. I want to be clear about that, because the story I am about to tell is not the story of a woman I disliked from the beginning. It is the story of a woman I trusted, and of the particular way that trust was used. Lily was born in 2017 before Jerome and Cassandra married. Jerome had been in a previous relationship. Lily was his daughter by a woman named Priya, who had moved to London in 2019 for work, and who was, by mutual agreement, not a consistent presence in Lily's life. Jerome had full custody. Cassandra had been Lily's stepmother since she was 4 years old. She was, by every measure I could observe, good to Lily. Attentive, patient, present. This is important. I want to say it again. Cassandra was good to Lily. That is in the record, and it stays there. What is also in the record, what I began to notice, after that birthday card, when I went back through the last 3 years, is a pattern I had not seen clearly until I saw it whole. The first time I noticed it, in retrospect, was Thanksgiving of 2021. The family drove down from Nashville. Cassandra brought a dish, a sweet potato casserole with a brown sugar topping that was, I will admit, delicious. Over dinner, Jerome mentioned to Lily that we always had sweet potato casserole at Thanksgiving. Lily said, "Because Mama Cass makes it." Jerome said, "No, sugar, we had it before," and Cassandra said lightly, smiling, "Oh, I think I might have changed the recipe a little," and the conversation moved on. It was a small thing. I did not think about it twice. The second time was Christmas of 2022. Cassandra gave Lily, as a gift, a small photo album, one of those custom-printed ones labeled Lily's Family. I looked through it after dinner. It had photographs of Lily with Jerome, with Cassandra's parents in Findlay. It had one photograph of me, standing in my garden. It did not have a photograph of Thomas. I said nothing. I told myself it was an oversight. Photo albums are imperfect. You cannot include everything. The third time was April of last year, when I found the birthday card. Grandma Cass, a grandmother who loves you the right way. I picked up my phone and called Jerome. He did not answer. I left a message asking him to call me when he had a minute. He called back that evening. I asked him, very simply, how often did Lily talk about Thomas? About her grandfather? There was a pause on the line. Then Jerome said, Mama, she was 3 when Dad died. She doesn't really remember him. I said, Jerome, does she know about the map room? Another pause. Then Jerome said, Mama, Cass reorganized the study when we visited last summer. She said she was trying to help you. I said, Jerome, where is the map your father drew? Silence. Jerome said, Mama, I don't know. That was the moment the record came into focus. After I hung up with Jerome, I went into the map room. I should explain what the map room had become. When Cassandra reorganized the study, Jerome's word, she had done the following, as best I could now reconstruct. She had taken the framed antique maps off the wall and stacked them, with care, against the far baseboard, wrapped in tissue paper. She had replaced them, on the walls, with a series of framed family photographs, most of them from Jerome and Cassandra's wedding, some from Lily's first years. On the shelf where Thomas's handmade map had been sitting in its frame, there was now a small decorative item, a ceramic owl that Lily had made at a craft fair in Nashville. The owl was painted in Lily's careful 7-year-old colors. It was, on its own terms, charming. Thomas's map was not on the wall. It was not on the shelf. I went through the storage boxes in the hall closet. I found the tissue-wrapped antique maps. I did not find the handmade one. I called Cassandra. I will tell you that conversation because it is important to how I understood the rest of what happened. I said, Cassandra, honey, when you organized the study last summer, did you happen to move the framed map Thomas drew, the Hale family places map? Cassandra said, Oh, Mrs. Hale, I meant to ask you about that. It was looking a little worn. The glass had a crack in one corner. I set it aside to ask if you wanted it reframed. I think I put it in the box with Jerome's old school things in the garage. Let me check and get back to you. She called me back 2 hours later and said she had looked through the box and the map was not there, and she was so sorry. She must have miscounted the boxes when everything was moved. But she would absolutely look for it the next time they were in Natchez. That was 8 months ago. The map has not been found. Now, I want to be precise here, because precision matters, and because I am a woman who deals in primary documents for a living. I do not know, to this day, whether Cassandra lost Thomas's map by accident or on purpose. I do not know whether the photo album without Thomas was an oversight or a decision. I do not know whether the birthday card's second sentence was something she thought carefully about, or something she wrote in 30 seconds, without considering what it communicated to the woman who would eventually read it. What I know is this. The pattern, taken together, was legible. A person who keeps records for a living could read it. A woman who had grown up in Natchez, in a culture where the question of who your people are and where they came from carries real social weight, was slowly and steadily replacing the Hale family record with the Price family record. Lily was being raised, 3 years into Cassandra's presence, in a household where the sweet potato casserole was Mama Cass's recipe, where the family album began in 2019, and where her grandfather Thomas was a man she was too young to remember. Cassandra had not invented this. She had simply occupied the space that grief had left. She had moved into the rooms that Thomas's death had emptied and made them her own rooms, gradually, as anyone does when they come into a family that is still rebuilding. I do not know, sitting here, whether she knew what she was doing. I am inclined to believe she did not, fully. I am inclined to believe that the impulse was genuine. She wanted to belong to this family. She wanted Lily to love her. She wanted the story of this household to include her as much as possible. That is a human impulse. I have it myself. But the effect was not neutral. The effect for Lily was a family history that began with Cassandra's arrival, and that was not the record. That was not the true record. And I was not going to let the true record get lost. My husband Thomas kept a small walnut box on his desk locked with a little brass clasp, where he filed his most important index cards. He was a man who thought in 3s by 5s. Whenever he made a decision that mattered, he wrote it down on a card. The date, the decision, the reason. He had cards going back to 1981. The box, after he died, went onto the shelf in the map room, where I have left it undisturbed. I went into the map room that evening after my call with Cassandra. I took down the walnut box. I unlocked it with the small brass key that lives on my keychain. I found the card from the 14th of April 2017, the day Jerome called to tell us Lily had been born. In Thomas's handwriting. Jerome called. Lily Grace Hale, born 11:22, a.m. 7 pounds 4 ounces. She has his ears. I held that card for a while. My hands did not shake. I am not a woman who shakes. But I sat with it, and I decided I was going to give Lily her grandfather, not as a confrontation, not as a correction delivered in anger to a daughter-in-law I still believed was not a malicious person. I was going to give Lily her grandfather the same way I had spent 8 years giving families their histories, through documentation, carefully assembled, given at the right moment, to the right person. I was going to write the Hale family record. I started in May. I gave myself 6 months. I want to tell you what I did, because the doing of it matters. I began with Thomas's index card box. There were, by my count, 312 cards, spanning 41 years of decisions, observations, and small notes about the life we had made together. I transcribed every one of them. I organized them chronologically. I looked for the moments where a card explained something I had forgotten, a decision, a reason, and I wrote annotations. This took 3 weeks. I then went to the Adams County Courthouse and pulled the deed records for every property the Hale family had owned since Ezekiel Hale's land purchase in 1887. 6 deeds, 4 generations. I photographed each one. I found, in the deed from 1923, a notation that I had never known a legal restriction on the property that had been challenged and removed in 1941, which meant that Thomas's grandfather had spent 18 years dealing with a legal obstacle that nobody in the family had ever talked about. I found, in the probate file from 1962, there's a handwritten letter from Thomas's father to the executor of his own father's estate. The letter was 4 pages long. It was the most direct thing I had ever read from that generation. I had not known it existed. I called Thomas's older sister Ruth, who is 84 years old and lives in a retirement community in Vicksburg. I drove to Vicksburg on a Tuesday in June. I sat with Ruth for 4 hours. I brought a recorder, with her permission. Ruth told me things about Thomas's childhood that Thomas had never told me. The year he was 14 and got in a fight at school that his father found out about and handled by taking him to every man's house who had seen it, and making Thomas apologize to each one in person. The summer he built his first set of porch steps, by himself, out of wood scraps, when he was 11 years old, and his father didn't say anything about them for 3 days, and then one evening said, "Boy, those steps are level." Ruth said that was the highest praise their father had ever given anyone. Thomas had not told me that story. I did not know it. I spent 2 weeks in July sorting through the photographs in Thomas's garage boxes. There were 11 boxes I had not opened since he died. I found 267 photographs I had forgotten existed. Thomas as a boy at Christmas. Thomas at 19, at a construction site, squinting into the sun. Thomas at our wedding, looking sideways at me, in a way I had not thought about in years, but recognized the moment I saw it. I scanned every photograph. I labeled each one. I redesigned Thomas's handmade map from memory. I redrew it in ink better than the original, because I had more time and steadier hands than Thomas had in 2001. I had it professionally framed. I rehung it in the map room. By October, I had a manuscript, 412 pages, including photographs, document reproductions, and transcriptions. I sent it to the same printer I use for my client books. I ordered 12 copies, one for each member of the extended Hale family. I had them bound in a navy blue hardcover with gold lettering, Hale Family Record, Natchez, Mississippi, 1,887 to the present. I sent 1 copy to Ruth in Vicksburg. I kept 1 for myself. I held the remaining 10. I called Jerome on a Thursday in November. I said, "Jerome, I need you to come home this weekend. Bring Lily. I have something for her." Jerome said, "Mama, is everything okay?" I said, "Everything is fine, Jerome. I have something for Lily. That's all." He said, "Should Cass come?" I said, "Jerome, I would like you to come on Saturday morning, just you and Lily, and stay for the afternoon. I would like Cassandra to come for dinner Saturday evening. I have something I want to give Lily first, and I want to give it to the 3 of you together after. Can you do that?" Jerome, who knew his mother well enough to understand that this was not a request to negotiate, said yes. Jerome and Lily arrived at 9:30 on Saturday morning. Lily came through the front door first. The way she always does, she runs ahead of Jerome, and she has learned to knock on the door once with her fist and push it open in the same motion, which is a Hale family habit. We knocked to announce, not to wait. She was wearing a yellow rain slicker even though it wasn't raining. She had a backpack on. She ran into the kitchen looking for biscuits, which is what I make on Saturday mornings, and which she has associated with my house since she was old enough to associate anything with anything. I fed her biscuits with butter and cane syrup. Jerome drank coffee. We talked about school and about a book Lily had been reading and about a bird that had been building a nest in the holly bush outside the kitchen window for the past 3 weeks. I did not rush. After breakfast, I took Lily into the map room. The framed map was back on the wall. I had put fresh flowers on Thomas's old desk, a yellow mum from the garden, and I had set the walnut card box in the center of the desk, unlocked. I had put one of Thomas's index cards on top of the box, propped up against it so Lily could see it. The card I had chosen was the one from the 14th of April, 2017. Jerome, standing in the doorway, saw the card. He read it. I watched his face. He did not speak for a moment. Lily, who was 7 and practical, and did not understand yet what silence between adults means, said, "Grandma Dorothy, what's this room?" I said, "This is your grandfather Thomas's room. He built it. Let me show you what's in it." I showed her the map first. I walked her through it the way Thomas would have, pointing to each entry, saying the name and the year. Ezekiel Hale, 1887. His son Marcus, 1911. Marcus's son Albert, 1943. Albert's son Thomas, your grandfather 1979. And there at the bottom, in Thomas's handwriting, Jerome, Nashville, 2017. Lily said, "Is that my dad?" I said, "That's your dad. Your grandfather put him on the map the year you were born." She looked at the map for a while. Then she said, "Where am I?" I said, "You are not on the map yet, but you will be." I pulled out the index card drawer. I showed her Thomas's handwriting on the April 14 card. I said, "Your grandfather wrote this the day your dad called to tell him you'd arrived. He wrote down everything he knew about you that day." Lily read the card. She was a good reader for 7, and she said, "He says I have my dad's ears." I said, "You do. And your grandfather noticed that the first day." She held the card, carefully. The way she had held, I noticed, the ceramic owl on the shelf with both hands, like it might break. Children understand, I have found, which objects require that treatment, even when no one tells them. I gave her the family record book. I had marked her chapter with a ribbon, a chapter I titled Lily Grace Hale, born the 14th of April 2017, which contained the index card, a photograph of and a paragraph I had written myself that began, "Your grandfather Thomas Hale built things that lasted. He built the back porch on this house, and the map room where you are standing, and a life with your grandmother that was good and honest and full. He did not get to know you for very long, but he knew you were coming, and he was glad." Lily read the paragraph. She read it again. She looked up at me. She said, "Grandma Dorothy, was he nice?" I said, "Lily, he was the best man I ever knew, and you have his ears. That is a gift." Jerome, who had been standing in the doorway this entire time, not speaking, made a sound I will not describe further. I handed him the box of tissues I had put on Thomas's desk in advance. He is his father's son. He took one without comment. Cassandra came for dinner that evening. I had made a full Hale family Saturday supper. Fried catfish, collard greens, cornbread, peach pie. The table was set with my mother's good plates, the ones with the blue border, which come out for family. I had placed a copy of the family record book at Cassandra's seat. When she sat down and saw it, she looked at it. She looked at me. She said, "Mrs. Hale, is this?" I said, "Cassandra, I have been making these for families for 8 years. I should have made one for my own a long time ago. Thomas should have been documented before Lily was old enough to forget. That is my failure, and I have corrected it." Cassandra opened the book. She turned the pages slowly. She came to the chapter about Lily. She read the paragraph I had written. Her face, which is not a face I have spent enough years reading to claim I understand fully, did something I was not expecting. It went very still, not defensive, not caught out, still in the way that faces go still when they are absorbing something they did not anticipate. She said, "Mrs. Hale, I never meant to." I said, "Cassandra, I know." I said it the way I say it to students who have made a mistake and know it, not a shortcut past the conversation, a statement of fact that opens rather than closes the room. She said, "The map. I looked for it. I looked for it for real." I said, "Cassandra, I redrawn the map. It is back on the wall. It is in the book. It will be in Lily's house one day, and her children's house. That is settled." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Is there a chapter for me in the book?" I said, "Cassandra, the book ends with Lily. You are in Lily's chapter. You are described as the woman who chose her father, and in doing so, chose her. That is in the record. It will stay there." She looked down at the book. She looked up. She said, "Thank you, Mrs. Hale." I said, "Cassandra, pass the cornbread." She passed the cornbread. We had supper. I want to be honest about what I am not certain of. I am not certain that Cassandra knew what she was doing. I have thought about this for a year, and I cannot tell you whether the birthday card's second sentence was calculated or careless. Both are possible. Both would be consistent with what I know of her. She is not a cruel woman. She is also not a woman who examines her own impulses carefully. There are a great many people in the world who do damage without intention, and who, if you asked them, would be genuinely surprised to learn what they had done. I am also not certain that my response was right, exactly. I am certain it was correct. Those are different things. It was correct because it restored the record without requiring an accusation that Cassandra could deny, and without requiring me to be angry in a way that would have made Jerome feel he had to choose. It was correct because Lily, who is 7 years old and innocent of all of this, now has her grandfather in her hands and on her shelf and in her chapter. That is what mattered. That is what I set out to do. Whether it was right, whether a more direct conversation would have served better, would have been more honest, would have given Cassandra the opportunity to acknowledge something she may not have fully acknowledged, I do not know. There is a version of this story in which I avoided the confrontation that might have cleared the air between us more completely. I have sat with that version. I have decided I can live with the version I chose. I am not certain Cassandra and I will ever be fully comfortable with each other. I am at peace with that uncertainty. What I am certain of is the simpler thing. Family records matter. Not because they are about the past, because they are about the present, because a child's understanding of where she comes from shapes, in ways we cannot fully trace, who she is able to be. Lily is going to grow up knowing that her grandfather built things with his hands and kept his decisions in a box and loved her ears before he met her. She is going to grow up with that knowledge sitting inside her, the way knowledge does when it comes from a book on your shelf that you can go back to. That is not a small thing. That is, in my opinion, one of the larger things a grandmother can do. I think about the families I have made records for over 8 years. The Tillman family in Woodville, who found the letters that changed what they thought they knew about their grandfather. A family in Faraday who discovered, in the probate records, that a great-great-grandmother had owned her own land before any woman in her social class was expected to. A family in Port Gibson who found a photograph, in a box of things thought lost, of a man no one alive had ever seen and who recognized, immediately, that his face was the face of the youngest grandson, 40 years forward in time. Every one of them said the same thing when I handed them the finished book. They said, "I did not know I needed this." That is what I made for Lily, and for Jerome. And, I will say though, it surprised me for Cassandra. Because here is the thing I have come to believe, in the year since November. If you want someone to stop filling the empty spaces with themselves, you fill the spaces first. You put the true record back on the wall. You make the room too full for substitution. Not aggressively, not as a punishment, just accurately. You make the record complete, and you let it stand, and you trust that the people who love this family will find their place in it. That is what Thomas would have done. I am almost certain of it. He would have built the thing correctly from the start. He would have made sure Lily had a chapter before she was old enough to be given a different one. I was 8 months behind. I am not sorry I was late. I am glad I got there. I want to close with the map room. I go in there most evenings for a few minutes. I sit in Thomas's chair. I look at the map on the east wall. I look at the last entry in his handwriting, Jerome, Nashville, TN, 2017. Below that entry, in my handwriting, I have added 2 lines. The first says, Lily Grace Hale, Nashville, TN, 2017. The second says, space reserved. I do not know whose name will go in that space. I do not know if Lily will stay in Nashville or go somewhere else. I do not know if she will add a city I have not yet imagined. I do not know what the record will say, 40 years from now, about the part of the family I will not be alive to see. What I know is that the map will be there, and the walnut box, and the family record book, on the shelf below the map, in its navy blue binding with the gold letters, and Lily's chapter, with Thomas's index card and his handwriting and the sentence about her ears. She will be able to go back to it, whenever she needs to, whatever version of herself she is carrying at the time, the 7-year-old in the yellow slicker, or the teenager, or the grown woman. She will be able to pick up the book and find herself in it, and find her grandfather in it, and know that she was seen and named and documented before she was old enough to remember being any of those things. That is what the record is for. Not to prove anything to anyone, not to correct anyone, not to punish, to make sure that the truth about a family outlasts the people who lived it. My grandmother Gloria told me, when I was starting my first year of teaching, that history is not about the past. It is about what the present thinks it knows. And what you can do, if you are careful and patient, is put the true thing in enough places that the wrong version cannot crowd it out entirely. I have been trying to do that all my working life. I should have started in my own house first. I am glad I got there before it was too late. Silence. Long enough to land. Then, if you have a story that belongs to your family, an elder who is still here, a box in the attic you have not opened, a record you have been meaning to make, I am asking you, as someone who does this for a living, do not wait. The people who hold the story will not always be here. The handwriting fades. The photographs become unidentifiable. The index card that says she has his ears sits in a walnut box until someone thinks to open it. Open the box. Write it down. Put it on the shelf. That is the record. That is the whole record, and it does not lie.